Thanks, Sarah. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everyone. My name is Deb Savaris. I'm the CEO of the Centre for Excellence in Child and Family Welfare, and we're the peak body that works across Victoria and Tasmania in this beautiful city. I want to warmly welcome everyone for this, what we call the Centre's annual Child Rights Seminar. If you can pop yourself on mute, that would be fantastic as you enter into the session. This year, our Children's Rights Seminar focuses on strengthening policy and service responses for online safety for children and young people. However, the critical voices of children and young people themselves are often missing from these conversations. So this seminar will bring together influential leaders, policymakers, researchers and advocates to highlight the value and urgent need to include the voice of children and young people in the issues that affect them. We will explore why this is so important, even in terms of these complex challenges, such as supporting online safety for children and young people. But before we start proper, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that our centre sits on, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that heartfelt respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in the child and family services sector, and any First Nations colleagues joining us here at the centre or who are joining us online. And it's always really nice for those of you that are joining to give us some indication of what lands you are joining us from, if you are able to do that in the chat. Many of you know this and know this well. Even though this is in a Zoom format today, please mute yourself through the session so we avoid any background noise. Our presenters love questions and engagement. Otherwise, you'll feel like we're talking into the vortex. So please turn on your chat box and ask lots of questions as they come to you along the way. We'll be curating those questions throughout the session to make sure that the presenters have line of sight of those. There's an option to turn on live captions for this event at the bottom of your screen. If you have any tech problems with this event and having any trouble, often, like lots of things, leave and maybe come back in to see if you can get it to work, or you can privately message the lovely Sarah Ryan, who you will see her waving, who will assist you in the best way that she can. So I just want to say we are exploring some big topics today, and we're here as professionals working with children and young people, but also as parents, family members, friends, and I think most of us all here are users of social media. So I want to highlight that in this session we will be discussing sensitive and distressing topics, including online harm, image-based abuse, sextortion and suicide. Please be aware that these discussions may be distressing for yourself or for those around you. If you feel uncomfortable or upset by any of the discussions today, please feel free to take a break and please make sure that you make yourself a priority. We have practitioners from the centre available should you need to talk to somebody directly. So please privately chat to Sarah and we will assist you in any way we can. Additionally, we've included some support phone lines if you need support, and they are on the screen. So thank you for being here. I know there's a lot of you here today. And as I said earlier, welcome to our second Children's Rights Seminar, a series of seminars which focuses on the importance of engaging children and young people in policy and service decisions that affect their lives. We know that frequently children and young people are not actively engaged in participating in public policy debates or influencing decisions. And we know this means that we fail to benefit from their views and therefore affect the sorts of change that both they and we want. And also that we don't often get what we would consider the best base and informed, effective responses. There's no better illustration to this than the current and complex debates that are occurring nationally and internationally about online safety and harm. Today we will hear from a diverse range of voices, leaders, policymakers, researchers and advocates on this matter. We also see the view and need to include the voices of children and young people in all of the issues that affect them, and even more so in relation to the complex challenges that the world really faces. The scale and impact of online harm for children and young people has been a focus in the media and policy debates for some time. We do hear some pretty frightening stories. Children and young people are being exposed to pornographic materials, grooming, sextortion, misogynistic content, and alarming messaging about body image. These are just a few of some of the messaging that they are bombarded with each day. Sophisticated algorithms analyse their behaviour, their likes, and the time they pause to view content on their devices. And we parents and adults have supplied to let them connect with each other and the world around them. The whole world is in a bit of upheaval on how to protect children right now, and governments are looking for ways to legislate to mitigate harms, and policies ranging from age restrictions on using different platforms to outright bans. And we know that in Brazil has blocked Twitter at their border. However, we know from past risk-taking behaviour in adolescence that many of these solutions don't work, and children and young people are already circumnavigating platform age limits and use of VPN to mask their country of origin. I don't know about you, but my 2.5-year-old granddaughter has remarkable dexterity when handling a phone, and the way she scrolls is sort of terrifying. So young people already use these platforms, often for their own reasons, won't tell their true age. And if they're blocked from one, they might move to another one pretty quickly. And many use their parents' accounts to participate. But we know that current efforts are also pushing responsibility onto platforms to show how they verify age, how they identify underage users, and the process they will use to manage children and young people's exposure to these platforms. In mid-September, the Albanese government's hand was forced on age restriction measures when South Australia announcing it would move to set its own age restrictions. So age restrictions seem to be a pretty point of debate at the moment, but we all know, and I'm sure we'll hear from people today, that that's not the only thing that needs consideration. More recently, Meta has announced the introduction of teen accounts with built-in privacy restrictions that give parents more control. And I think we all know that the process of implementing and enforcing age access restrictions will be challenging. The fears we have for children and young people are fears we have for ourselves too. These devices sit in all of our pockets. They take up far too much of our time and attention. And we know that children and young people will continue to use online platforms to engage with each other, to understand the world around them, and to shape their own identities, all of which can also have positive impacts on their mental health and well-being. We all have a collective responsibility to review and reshape social media platforms and platforms themselves that have evolved without regulation, so they are safe environments for everyone to use. So there is a delicate line, is there not, between safeguarding children and young people from online harm and removing their autonomy and decision-making rights in the issues that directly affect them. Children and young people remain largely invisible, and I have to tell you that's my experience almost every day in many of the conversations I'm in. And they are definitely invisible in so much of our public policy and service responses. They're not engaged with their views or frequently considered as having their needs and interests distinct from those of their parents. And this just isn't good enough. In my recent tour to Sweden, we saw highlighted the different approaches other countries are having to shifting the dial on centering children and young people's unique interests as a group. And really, it made me realise how far we have to go. While we cannot overlook the risk of harm to children and young people posed by digital content and AI technologies, we must include their voices, opinions, and insights in coming up with solutions that they need and they want. So this seminar today hopes to address some of the complexities. It won't. It will really, in many ways, is the tip of the iceberg of this sort of ever-evolving issue. And there are people speaking today who have a depth of knowledge that I'm quite jealous of. We start today with hearing from our National Children's Commissioner, Anne Hollonds, who will set the scene for understanding the importance of centering children's voices in policy development. We'll hear from Ashley Katz, who will share the proactive measures being taken by the National Office for Child Safety in responding to rising threats in the digital space. And next we'll have Amanda Keddie and Nicola Henry will share their research insights, and Wayne Holdsworth from Smack Talk, who will provide a parent's perspective, followed by a panel discussion. So lots of really fantastic speakers today. We'll then have a short break and we'll hear from those at the centre of today's topic, the young people themselves. We have representatives from Prevention United's Youth Advisory Group sharing their thoughts on how to protect children and young people in the online world. So first, to our keynote presentation, Anne Hollonds, the National Children's Commissioner. With over 23 years of leadership in child and family wellbeing, Anne has dedicated her career to improving the lives of children through research, policy and practice. Her experience as a psychologist working in areas like child protection and family violence has equipped her with invaluable insights into the needs of children and families. Commissioner Hollonds consulted directly with children and people and families in her work on the first action plan for the National Framework for Protecting Australia's Children. In an article published last week in the Centre's first edition of the newly relaunched journal Children Australia, she draws on what children, young people and families told her, combined with years of findings from royal commissions and inquiries, to identify the many barriers to evidence-based actions on policy reform for children and young people in Australia. She makes a strong call for accountability to our governments. Today, Anne will be speaking on the critical importance of centering children's voices in issues that directly affect them, especially in policy development. She will share insights from the Supporting Quality Engagement Project, which takes a human rights-based approach to ensure children's voices are heard. While SQE focuses on broader child participation, it highlights the importance of online safety, a key concern for children and young people. And we'll explore the balance between the benefits and risks of the online environment with children and discuss practical recommendations for embedding children's voices into policymaking. I love listening to Anne. She knows I love listening to her on the radio. They often get her to talk about the most complex of issues, and she makes them sound simple and some of the solutions really, really practical. So over to you, Anne. Welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me to share some reflections today. And I'd like to acknowledge I'm joining from the lands of the Camaragal people of the Eora Nations. And I pay my respects to their elders as well as the elders on all the lands that you're joining from today. We've got a fabulous lineup of speakers this afternoon, as Deb has outlined, including young people who I know will tell us exactly how it is for them. Oh, and congratulations on the first edition of the new phase of Children Australia that was launched last week. It's very exciting to have that back, that journal. My role as National Children's Commissioner is about monitoring laws and policies to make sure that the human rights of children are protected. I'm responsible for promoting awareness and respect for the human rights of all children in Australia, but especially those children who are most disadvantaged and who often don't get the chance to join a youth advisory group or some other formal mechanism for participation. I consult with children and young people across Australia and communicate their views, especially to governments. All the work I do is guided by the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. The Convention is the most ratified international human rights treaty in the world, and it makes clear that children have the same human rights as adults, and additionally, they are entitled to special protections because of their unique vulnerabilities and attributes as children. By ratifying the Convention in 1990, Australia promised to protect and uphold the rights of all children in our country. However, unlike other countries, the Convention has not been incorporated into domestic legislation here. This is a problem, especially given that we have a federated governance structure that further diminishes accountability and coordination when it comes to children's policy. Now, I often say it's like someone's taken a bag of seeds and flung them widely everywhere, or even wildly everywhere, it's hard to work out who's actually in charge and has eyes on children and their safety and well-being. Children sit awkwardly at the intersections of the jurisdictions, and the most vulnerable children are falling in the gaps. Two of the four guiding principles in the Convention are highly relevant to online safety for children and young people. These are the best interests of the child as our primary consideration, that's Article 2, and the children's right to be heard and to have their views taken into account, Article 12. In 2021, the Committee on the Rights of the Child commented on children's rights in the digital environment and reaffirmed that the best interests of the child should be a primary consideration, and I'll quote, in all actions regarding the provision, regulation, design, management and use of the digital environment. The committee said that we need to consider the rights of children and young people in relation to seeking, receiving and imparting information, being protected from harm and having their views given due weight. Balancing the right to seek, receive and impart information with the right to be protected from harm in the online environment is a complex issue we're grappling with right now, with plans to limit access to social media by the South Australian government and, of course, both sides of politics at the federal level. And recently, Instagram announced new measures to limit exposure of teenagers to potentially harmful content. Research is showing that the outcomes of social media use by kids are mixed and can depend on which social media platforms are being used. Some social media use has a positive impact on life satisfaction. For example, in research by the ANU, young people who identify as non-binary and regularly use Twitter or X have reported high levels of life satisfaction. There are mixed findings also in the report that we did in 2022 called Mental Health Shapes My Life. And we found that social media was having both a positive and negative influence on children's mental health and well-being. The Guardian newspaper last week spoke to some children and their views were mixed as well, with some seeing the ban as worthwhile amid online dangers, while others saying it would be socially inconvenient and actually hard to enforce. So with research showing that there are positive benefits for some and negative impacts for others, how and where do we find the balance? This is the key question. And of course, we're all living our lives online now, including kids. The internet is the place where we get all of our information. So what are the rights of children and young people when it comes to online safety? A human rights-based approach tells us that when we're seeking to limit a human right, it's essential that careful consideration is given to how lawful, necessary and proportionate those limitations are. In 2023, we developed a child rights impact assessment tool, which is designed to help governments and service providers assess how children's rights and well-being will be affected by new laws and policies, and also for evaluation of policy after implementation. By the way, all of these documents I'm mentioning you can have a look at on our human rights website. So the Child Rights Impact Assessment tool uses a child-centred approach, including using children and young people as themselves as sources of information to be useful for governments when drafting legislation and policy, including around social media limits. Recently, the Senate inquiry report into the Climate Change Amendment Bill recommended that the Australian government consider the wide use of child rights impact assessment tools to assist in policy development and decision-making. Considerations about the best interests of the child can't be based on assumptions just made by adults. We need to actively consider children's views in decision-making about issues that affect them. In the current debate around social media bans, we've heard a lot about parental concerns, and in fact, the Prime Minister has said things like parents are worried sick and parents want their kids off their phones and on the footy field. But we've heard less about what children and young people themselves have to say on the matter, and I think that's something we still need to do. The issue about how to keep kids safe online is going to test our country's ability to weigh up both positives and negatives and our ability to respect and protect the human rights of children. Sarah, oh no, I don't need the slide yet. Sorry, in a minute. So Article 12 in the Convention on the Rights of the Child recognises children as holders of broad-based rights rather than recipients of adults' actions. In the past, the views and needs of children and young people have been rarely sought and not considered in any systematic way. Bringing children into decision-making processes challenges historical attitudes to children and their capabilities. And kind of there's an assumption that adult decision makers will inherently act in the best interests of children. Article 12 says that every child has the right to express their views on matters that affect them and to have their views taken into account. Out of all the 54 articles in the Convention, I think this is one of the most challenging because it disrupts traditional ideas like that children should be seen and not heard. It challenges the idea that adults will always know what's best for kids, and it particularly challenges the long-held idea that we are protecting children by not involving them, by not inviting them to express their views and not letting them in on what's happening. So Sarah, if you could please put up the slide now. I'm going to now say a little bit about the Lundy model. And Professor Lundy is the Professor of International Children's Rights and Professor of Law at Queen's University in Belfast. I'm not seeing the slide, but I hope it's up. So I've got my notes up. Laura Lundy, she's the preeminent academic in this field, and her model of child participation is now used across the world as a platform for government and organisational policies. The model articulates 4 stages for implementing Article 12, and this can be helpful for understanding what the key elements in this article are all about. I'm not going to go into detail on it, but just to illustrate, I'm going to mention a few things. The first 2 stages are about the right to express a view, and in the model, these are called space and voice. Under space, children must be given an opportunity to express their views safely, and under voice, children must be facilitated to express their views. In order for a child to be able to express their views, it's critical that the child is first given information about the process, and that's really the starting off point. And the way we facilitate their voice is important. For example, it takes skill and time to build a relationship of trust. The next 2 stages are about the right to have their views given due weight. So number 3 is audience. The view must be listened to by the right people, and that means the people who have the power to act. And the last one is influence. The view must be acted on as appropriate. This is a really important one, and we often get this wrong. So influence means that the views of children and young people must be acted on and given due weight according to their age and maturity. So while we're listening a lot more now to kids, there's little evidence of the views of children being translated into policy. Influence is also about transparency, giving feedback to the child, explaining what's happened and why. And we as the adults, we're the duty bearers, and we need to make sure that children are supported to have a voice and then supported to understand what we did with what they said, including why something they asked for didn't happen. This is simply treating them with respect. I always recommend when I'm asked for advice on this that those wanting to consult with children first ask themselves questions about why are they doing this, and especially how will they use the information that the children will provide. So, Sarah, you can take down the slide now. Thank you. Finally, as National Children's Commissioner, I've had the privilege to conduct several consultations with hundreds of children around Australia. At the end of most consultations, I ask a final question. What's the one thing you would like me to pass on to the Prime Minister when I meet with him? The one thing that would make the biggest difference. Last year, we called one of our reports, "Do something with the information we told you." Do something with what we told you. So this is, no surprise, a direct quote from the kids that to that final question. This is what they wanted me to say to the Prime Minister. Last month, I had a report tabled in Parliament that we called Help Way Earlier. And this was advice from over 150 children in the child justice systems who were desperately crying out for help way earlier. I see the convention as providing practical tools for solving our most challenging policy problems. Unfortunately, because we have not incorporated the Convention on the Rights of the Child into our legislation, we have no compass to guide our decision-making on policies impacting children. There's no national accountability for child wellbeing or human rights. There's no accountability for action based on decades of evidence. In many ways, in Australia, we're still spinning our wheels and we're pretending that children are important to us. We're not addressing the barriers to action, the lack of accountability, the lack of coordination, and the lack of urgency for reform, because governments are not paying attention to the evidence, including from children themselves. I urge all of you to work together so that these calls for action can be heard, and so that together we can make sure that governments are held accountable for action based on evidence and human rights. Thank you.
Oh, Anne, that was incredibly powerful. And with a croaky voice, she still did a beautiful job. I mean, I know there'll be people that want to ask you direct questions. I've got a couple of questions. Mandy, do you have any? Are there any coming through? Oh, Mandy's on mute. I might ask mine, and then
Yeah, you go first.
So, this is sort of interesting from my perspective. But are there a couple of things that kids said to you that really sort of motivated you, inspired you? You know, sometimes there's a couple of things that kids say that you go, because I often love the titles of your reports because you can tell they've come from children. You know, they're sort of helping early, help us now. Can you just do something with the information we're giving you? Is very powerful. But were there a couple of things that kids have said to you that you thought, even surprised you? You thought, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way, or I hadn't realised the urgency, or that's actually, is there anything like that? Because I know I often hear stuff and I think, wow, I hadn't thought about it.
Look, it's lots of things. I suppose because the Help Way Earlier report is top of mind for me at the moment, and I'm doing a lot of briefings on that report. And it's pretty grim. So what I'm going to share is quite grim. But what I found quite shocking was when I spoke to children in the child justice systems who, you know, I asked them about, like this one kid, he's in detention, and I'm asking him about what his plans are when he leaves. And it emerged that I think he was about 16, 17, this young boy, that he had really no sense of what he would do. He'd been in and out of detention since he was 10. And he had no one to back him. There was no one that he could point to who would support him when he was released. And really all he could see was that he would eventually progress to the adult prison system. And I just found that to be so shocking, so chilling, so alarming that in Australia in 2024, you know, we've kind of, the light's gone out of these children's eyes, and they see no positive future for themselves.
It's
I'm
really
sorry,
depressing.
that's very grim.
No,
I wish
but
I could have quickly thought of an uplifting one for you, but
no.
that's the way where my mind went.
Well,
It's
I think
terrible.
a 16-year-old is, and obviously sitting with that on his shoulders as a child is just horrific, really upsetting. Now, we've got some questions. I knew they'd come. I'm not going to keep you for too long because I know that your voice is really struggling today. But this is a really important one, and I think this is one we've discussed. Thank you for this, Anne. What do you think the biggest holdups are in including children's rights or children's voice in legislation? Now, I know Scotland have done some stuff there, but why can we not just lift and shift the stuff that's in the convention into legislation? What's our problem? What's our beef?
Well, okay, there's a couple of answers to that. One is there's no votes in doing that. So I've been told, Commissioner, there's no votes in children by members of Parliament. So, you know, if there was something, some political gain to be made by doing it, then I think there would be some moves. That's my honest answer there. Of course, as a federation, things are always much more complicated, but that's kind of why we need it even more, I think, because we allow the federation to become a barrier to evidence-based reform. But unfortunately, it all comes down to the political will, and we just don't have that for this issue, for issues relating to the wellbeing and human rights of children.
We've got so many people on this meeting today. So these questions about like why not and what can we do. So it's a couple of others. Just in terms of your reflections about the current debate about online safety and harm, there seems to be so much focus on protecting, removing risk, but not in partnership with children and young people. So in terms of the barriers to the system, I mean, you did touch on this in your opening remarks. Why are kids just so excluded from this particular debate? And in fact, their skills and capabilities of using the online environment far surpasses any adult I know. I mean, really, are engineers and creators in a way that I could only imagine. So it seems implausible they wouldn't be involved in the solutions.
Well, I'm still hopeful that they will be. So, you know, I guess it's a question of the government seeing the value. I know the E-Safety Commissioner has an advisory group, and I would think that they would be co-opted into this for sure. But I think I think unfortunately it's a very well ingrained attitude that adults know what's best for kids. We're battling it on every front. And as you say, you'd think on this front, I always ask the kids for my tech advice. So we should be asking them. And interestingly, you know, they're not, you know, people might think, oh yeah, but they'd always say, you know, no ban, but they're not saying that. They're not saying that, and they are actually, kids are saying that what Instagram has put in place, you know, is a positive. So their advice is very wise. And I would hope that through this particular issue that we're grappling with right now, that more people will come to see that children and young people have some very important and wise advice to give us.
I mean, I get annoyed, but I'm a bit of an optimist like you, Anne. I actually think that at some point there'll be a tipping point because some of the problems we are facing globally really need children to be much more involved. So I'm gonna wrap it up there. I just want to say people loved the slide as well, Anne. They felt, you know, the Lundy model, people obviously were taking photos of that because it's a really useful tool, I think. I will say to people on the call, please get on the website and look at all the tools that are available that's been created by the Commission because they're there. And if you can do one thing for Anne, it'll be use the frameworks in your work. Use the child rights frameworks in everything you do, because the more that they become commonplace, the more powerful it will be in the work that we're all trying to do. And did you want to make a final comment?
Yeah, look, I'll just say to that, you know, of course, in Australia, we're all on a learning journey with this. we're not perfect at, how we're consulting children and translating their views into policy. But we have begun, and there is a lot more, we're hearing a lot more from the voices of children, which is a very much a positive thing. And like Deb, I'm very much an optimist that we're going in the right direction. I just get a bit frustrated that we're not going fast enough. And that comes down to, as I said, all of us sort of working together on this and amplifying that to governments everywhere that we need to do much more, that it's far too slow, and that there are children that are, they're falling behind. And, that they're most vulnerable children, I often say, are victims of Federation failure, and that's not okay. Thank you so much, Deb, for this opportunity.
Oh, thank you so much. And can we just thank Anne with all of those reactions that you use online, like the smiles and the hearts and the thumbs up, because we're very lucky to have Anne. Well, not screaming and yelling. She gets cross about it being a bit slow, but she's very, very helpful in this space. And if we didn't have her, I don't know what it would be like in terms of the children's rights agenda. So thank you, Anne. Thank you so much.
Thanks again. And thanks everyone for all your great work that you do for kids. Full of admiration for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Okay, so we'll keep on moving if that's okay to everybody. We've got quite a lot of people on this meeting today, and I would just say Anne did leave us, but please arm yourself with all of the information that's available on the Commission. We talk about children's rights and we talk about working with children more appropriately, but you're willing to arm yourself with those frameworks and understand them yourselves in order to be able to be effective as an army of people that can make children's rights, which feel theoretical, a much more practical thing in reality. All right, so now we're going to move to Ashley Katz, who is going to do the next presentation. Ashley is the Director of Child Protection and International Partnerships section with the Australian Attorney General's Department. That's a tongue twister. Ashley has over 20 years of experience working within both the UK and Australian public service, with extensive policy and program delivery experience. Ashley has had executive roles in the AG's department and the Department of Home Affairs, overseeing industry and international engagement to combat online child sexual exploitation and abuse. Today, Ashley will address the urgent issue online safety for children and young people in response to the increasing risk posed in the digital spaces. She will share proactive measures the National Office is implementing to safeguard children, promote digital resilience and ensure safe online environments. We all know this is a crucial conversation, and Anne has got us off and started today, and we're very fortunate to have Ashley's expertise guiding us through this important topic. Just also want to let people know that Professor Leah Blomfield and myself, we co-chair the Attorney General's Committee that's working on preventing child sexual abuse and the second national plan. And there is a lot going on in this arena. You might not know about it, but after today, you're going to know a whole lot more. So Ashley, over to you.
Thanks so much, Deb, and thanks for having me today. I hope I'm going to give you a little flavour of some of the work that we've been doing for the last few years in the online space. And I think, as Anne touched upon, and also want to thank Anne, and her work really informs what we do in being able to include those voices of children. And yeah, it's really important that we have these conversations and keep it centred on children. I am just going to try to share my screen so I can do my slides. So do let me know if this does not work. Okay, hopefully we are good. Okay, can everybody see? Yep. Excellent. Okay, let's see how we go. So, as Deb kindly said, I'm Ashley Katz. I'm from the National Office of Child Safety, and we sit in the Attorney General's Department of Commonwealth. I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about what the department is doing in the online space. I'll get my slides. I'd just like to firstly acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and the connection to the lands. I'm here in the ACT on Ngunnawal land. Pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging and acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people that are with us today. I'd also like to acknowledge victims and survivors and their supporters who may be with us today. We thank you for your advocacy work. It's actually so fundamental to what the National Office is able to do, and to make sure that we work for you and learn from your experiences. And that really is our core purpose and the effort. So thank you. So just for a little bit of context, the National Office for Child Safety was established in 2018, and the National Office was a recommendation from Australia's Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse, which was really fundamental, I think, in the history for Australia in this space. And the office is dedicated to implementing some of those priorities that were recommended from the Royal Commission. What I'm going to focus on today are some of those initiatives that really targeted the prevention, disruption and detection in the online space. And if we think back to 2018, things have really changed even since then. And I think the online space was a very small part of when we talked about tackling child sexual exploitation and abuse. When we look at now in 2024, that is very different, the national conversation. And what children and young people are experiencing is very different. And I think we need to make sure that we're evolving with that. So some of the measures particularly that came out of Australia's 10-year national strategy to prevent and respond to child sexual abuse, which covers abuse in all settings, were around actually engaging with the tech industry and the public on this issue, because fundamentally it was about awareness raising, and also can we work with industry to try and prevent this before it even happens. We certainly don't want to just focus on the criminal justice system, because we know by then that harm has already occurred. But is there a broader approach that we can take? So we have a number of measures the National Office are driving forward, and I'll talk to some of these, but it's about working with industry, raising public awareness, looking to other countries and what they're doing and who are the really influential countries in this space. And I think it's no surprise that with most tech companies based out of the US, it's fundamental that we work with US government and stakeholders and decision makers to tackle this from all angles and use our collective capability, and then really drive domestic engagement with the industry that sits here. And this was actually all pre the Online Safety Act and the E-Safety Commissioner. So again, we've seen some significant changes since this began. So let's look at some of the facts and the numbers, because I think this is where some of the arguments go off in one direction or the other. Like, how bad is the issue? Are we exaggerating what is happening online, or are we not? And is it worse than we maybe think it is? So the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children is a organisation called NCMEC. They sit in the US, and every US-based tech company is required to report any instance of online child sexual abuse to that centre. So it's the biggest of its kind, because most of those large social media platforms are headquartered out of the US. And NCMEC receives all of those reports and then sends them out to global law enforcement around the world. So those reports might come from tech platforms, they might come from reporting hotlines such as the E-Safety Commissioner, the International Watch Foundation, or they might come from just users themselves who are reporting. So the last 2023 showed over 36 million reports. So that's just reports. Each one of those reports could hold a vast volume of content. So that's not individual images and videos, that's just reports to NCMEC. And that has gone up significantly year on year. We know that nearly 75,000 of those reports were attributable to Australia. So that means there's something in that report that suggests that either an offender or a victim is based in Australia. So those reports come into Australia and they go to the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation. So that's the ACE, as we call it. That's led by the Australian Federal Police and also has participation from other relevant agencies and state and territory police. So the ACE receive all those reports, they triage them, and then they're able to send them out to the states and territories or whatever the response needs to be. But that's really our sort of globally leading centre of excellence, actually. We're lucky to have the ACE and AFP leading that. That is tell us that their reports increased by 45% in the last financial year. So we can see globally the figures are going up. We can also see that here in Australia, the figures are going up. However, statistics, we can all talk about statistics for hours, I think, about how to interpret them. So it's important we look at some of the detail within that, because increased reporting can also be increased detection. Maybe we're doing better at looking for that material, reporting it and finding it, or maybe there's more of it. So we need to really drill down on some of that information, I think, when we quote these statistics. But we're pretty sure that instances and the type of offending is increasing. So we look to organisations like the Internet Watch Foundation, who are in the UK. They do some really good research and reports. And the most recent, I think, that everyone's interested to see is the impact of artificial intelligence on this space. So are we likely to see some of the things we should be concerned about at the moment around AI-generated images? And what is that looking like in reality? So they reported over 20,000 images were posted to a single dark web forum in the last year. So we can see the potential for what AI will do, and it's important that we keep our eye on some of those emerging issues and see whether our response is still fit for purpose. But this is in addition to the kind of threats that we already see and are still tackling with, just around the sharing of child abuse material online. We know that offenders are often the earliest adopters of technology. They will find a way to use it before, we've really caught up. So technology's made it easier for offenders to access children and young people. There's no doubt about it. 20 years ago, it would have been much more difficult to make contact with a child. Now anybody with a device opens a door, and that's a possibility. And that age of children with devices is getting younger. So it's important that we acknowledge that and have prevention and response that is around that. It's a scary figure, I think, particularly as adults, and we didn't experience this growing up, but offenders, law enforcement will say they can see in 10 minutes how somebody's made contact and then has manipulated a child to perform some kind of act on camera. I think it's important that we don't equate what our experience of being online is necessarily with what children and young people are experiencing, because it can be very different, and there's some very different dynamics at play. So what has the National Office done about this? So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is the One Talk at a Time campaign. So as part of Australia's national strategy, in October 2023, we launched a national awareness raising and behavioural change campaign. It's the first of its kind. It's the first national campaign in this space, and it's really targeted at adults that play an active role in the lives of children and young people. It encourages people to learn about what child sexual abuse is. It encourages people just to have conversations. I think, those on this webinar today that work in this space will know that we will talk about this because we know it needs to be talked about, and we need to really understand the issues. But it's really hard when you talk to somebody that doesn't work in this space. Most people don't want to talk about it. It's not nice, and it's not something they want to think about. And that's a real barrier to us being able to look at behavioural change. So this campaign was really well researched and looked at how do you encourage people to have preventative conversations with young people in their lives. So there is an avenue for children to speak about it, particularly at home and in that kind of setting. So the campaign was a series of adverts that you may have seen on TV or on bus stops or billboards. But around that was also a range of educative tools and resources to support adults to have the conversation, because no one had those conversations with us. This wasn't in our generation. So it's not easy to do so. So there's some really good fact sheets and toolkits at child-safety.gov.au that go along with the campaign, and we hope that people will access those when they see these adverts. Is the campaign working? It's undergoing evaluation just now. It was in market. It was available to see up until the 30th of June. Over that period, it had over 70 million views across advertising channels, and over 1 million people viewed on the child-safety.gov.au website, which is just a massive increase. And we hope that for each person that saw that, it triggered something to make them think about the children and the young people in their lives, and hopefully took the next step to have a conversation about that. And then currently we're supporting content for people from First Nations communities and culturally and linguistically diverse communities, and that will continue through the rest of this year to make sure that this campaign really resonates with everyone. Also in the national office and in my team, we were given funding to stand up a capacity building program. So what we know in the online space, unfortunately, Australia also has many offenders who target victims in Southeast Asia and possibly the Pacific. We certainly see it prolifically in Southeast Asia, in the Philippines and Thailand and Cambodia. So we want to help those countries to be able to uplift their response as well, and be able to reduce the demand for that kind of offending, particularly live streaming online. So one of the measures is the Indo-Pacific Child Protection Program. There's 2 streams of work across Southeast Asia and another one in the Pacific, 2 very different regions. Southeast Asia, this crime's been well established, unfortunately, for quite some time, a number of years. There's some large NGOs that are working with governments there to try and deliver training to prosecutors to understand what is, a very new way of dealing with a criminal case when you're looking at digital evidence. Very young children as victims, how do we make sure that when they go through those processes that it's child friendly, that they're able to come forward and their voice is heard. And Australia has, some experience in this space and really wants to support the countries in the region to be able to do that. So we do things like we have a program for prosecutors in Thailand with UNICEF. We're working with the ICMEC, the International Centre of Missing and Exploited Children, around digital evidence, which is hugely complex in the criminal justice process. We're doing that with Cambodian prosecutors. In a few weeks, we've managed to get people from Indonesia police force into sort of global conferences where they get to have conversations like this and learn from other people's experience and expertise. The Pacific is very different. We really don't know the scale and nature of online child sexual exploitation and abuse in the Pacific. But we know there's some of the same warning signs that we saw in Southeast Asia. So we want to make sure countries there understand what they can do to be preventative in this space. And so we've undertaken an environmental scan to understand the nature, the extent, and what is already being done to respond to this crime type. The scan should hopefully raise some awareness in the Pacific and gives us something to engage with other governments on and other international partners. And there's a lot of work happening already to make sure that they're sort of able to prevent this kind of crime, particularly around online and live streaming, from escalating to the point where we may have seen in Southeast Asia. So we're hoping they can learn from the experience of others, which I think is really important. So internationally, I think I touched on earlier, many of these large platforms are based in the US, and that poses a real challenge when we talk about working with them and even in the criminal justice process. So we really work closely through what's called the 5-country ministerial. So the grouping of the UK, US, Canada, New Zealand, and ourselves. Yeah, that's 5. And those countries have worked together on a huge range of national security and other issues for many years, and child sexual exploitation and abuse is always part of that as well. And I think if we share our collective experience and our different legislation, different approaches, different relationships, we're not all starting from scratch. So that 5-country ministerial 5 years ago engaged closely with a group of survivors, the Phoenix 11, who are based out in Canada, and tech companies, and launched what was the first of its kind, and this was pre any kind of regulation of tech platforms. There were voluntary principles to counter online child sexual exploitation and abuse. Those voluntary principles set out the expectations, the real baseline for platforms and companies, and urged them to voluntarily step up and tell us what they're doing to keep children safe, and engage with us so that we can feed back to them what our expectations are, what we see, what we think needs to be addressed, that they do more than just what is, the basis of legislation, which is to report online abuse, but actually try and prevent it in the first place. So it's a critical role that group plays in holding industry to account, encouraging them to invest in tools, invest in expertise, prioritize child safety when they're making commercial decisions. We don't want child safety just to be the cost of doing business for large tech platforms. It's important that they, right from the outset of a design process, look at the impact that might have on children and young people. So they've been in place for nearly 5 years. And I think what we've seen in that time is the need for regulation. So we've seen the e-Safety Commissioner and the Online Safety Act in Australia. We've seen in the UK, Ofcom are the regulator, and their Online Safety Act. Ireland are just doing the same. And that's because really the voluntary principles showed that there was only so much companies would do. Whilst they'll sign up to them, the actual implementation is a very different story. And some of those largest companies are really not doing what you would think they were doing to keep children safe online. So that works in tandem with regulation, but the voluntary principles should really encourage them to step up, do more, and go a bit further than what they're currently doing. Here domestically in Australia, all those companies are represented. Here in Australia, they have huge markets. You'll recognise all those names up there. Children and young people use them every day. So we had a measure around actually engaging with companies here and really getting them to work with our law enforcement in particular on what is happening domestically in Australia, because every region and geographic region has different issues. And you know, some of these things need tailoring to the region. So we host a digital industry event each year, which tackles new and emerging issues that law enforcement are having. And it tries to build those relationships with tech companies. We need to hold them to account, but we also need to work with them because they have many of the answers. They certainly have the resources, more so than others might have. So we need to have those dialogue, feedback to them. What are law enforcement seeing? What are the realities? What are the challenges and what are the blockers? And so once a year, we meet with them, and the last two have taken place up at the ACE in Brisbane with operatives and in a room so they can hear directly what are the cases that they're seeing and how does the behaviour of tech companies impact on that. That's a really closed door event so that they can have very candid and conversations. And that can feed back into some of the policy responses that the department has. So we have one more of those to go under the current action plan that we have under the national strategy, but it's proven really helpful, I think, to make sure that we build those relationships before we need them as well. And then the final thing I just wanted to touch on was the Shadows of the Web documentary. So the last measure that we were given was around innovative engagement. So how do we engage with the public? Again, this is about how do we get people to even talk about this issue? The national campaign is a long-term generational change campaign, but we had an opportunity to do something that was a bit of a shorter term and particularly targeted at parents and carers in this space. And we've seen, unfortunately, in Australia the last couple of years, the issue of sextortion, of you know, whether it's organised crime groups or other offenders online extorting children for money or for sexual gratification and more images. It's risen exponentially. You know, and we know we've seen these cases of some children that's, you know, horrifically resulted in suicide. So that rise of sextortion is something we want people to be aware of and actually understand what can be done about it. And the national campaign around starting conversations and one talk at a time is an example of what you can do to try and you know, help children by making sure they have that opportunity to have conversations when they feel like something's not right about what they're doing online. We don't want to take devices off them. We want them to talk about it. We want to help them through it. So The Shadows of the Web is a documentary that we created with a company called Blackfish. It was very recently launched just last month. It highlights Australia's response, which we sometimes don't see, but actually Australia has a global leading response as far as online child sexual exploitation and abuse. We have a regulator who is, you know, globally and world leading. There isn't another one like the Safety Commissioner and her staff at the Commission and the work that they're doing and the powers that they have. Also the AFP ACE and the work that they do with state and territory police. And also the civil society and NGO sector in Australia is incredibly active and focused and holds all of this to account. So we wanted to capture all that in a documentary that said, here's the threat, this is the response that we have. But actually, here's the role of tech companies, and that's lacking. And again, we need to put some pressure on and hold them to account. And also, this is what you as parents and carers can do. So The documentary is now a free resource. It's available on our website on child-safety.gov.au. I've watched it with my teenage children. I must say, even in our house where we talk about this all the time, it started other conversations. They had other questions. It's available for private screenings. We want people to use it as a tool for engagement. If there's any benefit to you having it, then we're super happy to work with anybody that wants to show that documentary and have expert panel discussions and things like that. It's a really important vehicle, I think, for people to talk about the issue and understand some of it. And I think if the technology works, we may be able to just show you the trailer for those that haven't seen. Hopefully you'll be able to hear.
Hi, Ashley. We have no sound. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
We can see it. We've popped the link in the chat for anybody who wants to take a look.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, we weren't sure that would work, but do have a look at the line and you can actually view the whole documentary online as well. There we go. And just some support things up there. They were on at the beginning. Thank you, Debs, for that as well. But particularly after seeing the documentary, I think it's quite hard for some people to watch some of that and have those discussions. So please do reach out to those support organisations, some of which are in the documentary as well. So thank you to the Sonia Ryan, Carly Ryan Foundation and Brave Hearts and ICMEC who were in there as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. And I can't believe you've got teenage children. It's just impossible. You look so young. But anyway,
Thank you.
look, I just want to say, I know that I just want to reinforce how confronting some of this is. It will get harder as we move through this session. We incredibly fortunate to have Wayne with us today as well. So this is not easy stuff, but I think the more of these sessions we have, the more important it is to talk about it, because in fact it isn't talked about enough, or it's talked about as horrifying and horrible, but not, well, what are we going to do about it? Because parents and children themselves are saying we have to do something about this because there is way too much suffering. And you did mention suicide, Ashley. There is, there are active suicides in this space, and we've got to prevent that from happening of our young as a consequence of this. We will, so although we're sharing this today, we will keep these conversations going. This isn't about doing something today and not keeping the conversation going. And there are a lot of you on this call, so clearly many of you are looking for ways to both advocate, but also ensure that your knowledge is up to date, and that we can, that you, when you're working with young people or families, that you've got the right sort of information at your fingertips. But there are a couple of questions, Ashley, and I thought it would be worth just quickly asking you those. Some of them, they're work in progress, we know that, but I think a couple of the questions really relate to the large tech companies and their responsibility and their, I use the word advisedly, they're being complicit in what they actually control. So, yeah. And it is a deep concern, I think, to the Australian public and to parents themselves, just about the role that they play. You did mention the regular meetings and the coming together, but the questions here are like, they are complicit. What are we doing about it? What can we do about it? And we all know it's a massive problem. You talked about the Asian Pacific, clearly a massive problem. Do you want to make a comment about that? Because clearly there's been some inroads, but like everything, it takes way too much time for big change to occur. Do you want to make a comment about that?
Yeah, Deb, and I think that you've hit the nail on the head there. Legislation takes time. Public debate takes time, research, engaging with people that will be affected. That's a process. Technology is moving so much faster than that. So there's a few things I think to comment on. firstly, we probably have more powers here in Australia to regulate the tech industry than anywhere else in the world right now. That in itself is challenging because most companies are not based here. So we're really testing for the first time what we can do when we don't have companies based here. But we have got those powers. But already since the Online Safety Act came into force just 3 years ago, we are reviewing it because things have changed already. And we now see crime types and that we didn't see then. So the rise of artificial intelligence, the expansion of end-to-end encryption on, mainstream social media, these are all high-risk things that we wouldn't have envisaged. So it's important that our legislation is technology agnostic, so it's not specific to just what's happening right now, that we really future-proof it. But I think we, aside from legislation, we have to expect companies to do more than that, because otherwise we're always going to wait for legislation to catch up, by which time the harm's probably already occurred for many, many children and young people. So we need to put public pressure on companies. There's no other industry where you can just do this and there's no consequence for a number of years, despite the growing evidence showing harm that occurs. And we know that there's tools available because some companies are using them. So it's important that, therefore, the baseline is not the only line. There should be, it should be a commercial advantage to be a safe platform, quite frankly. And currently it's not. And it's because it's complex. It's complex for parents, it's complex for children. They change their services and their platforms all the time, introduce new features and things like that. And we've got to make sure that we hold them to account. We know what they're actually doing. And I think the Safety Commissioner's powers on transparency is the first time in the world anyone has been able to compel a company to say, what tools are you actually using? You say you're keeping children safe, but are you actually using the tools, to scan for known child abuse material? Are you looking for the language that we know is used when children are being groomed? Things like that. So it's really important that we hold them to account, and we do that publicly, and at the same time that we make sure our legislation is fit for purpose, that we regulate tech companies in a way that is, that is adequate for the harm that is being caused, but also that internationally we don't have this sort of splinter net of regulation or legislation, and we try and do this as holistically as possible, and that we don't also just target the top tier platforms. There's an awful lot of providers of different apps and platforms and things out there, and we expect that level of child safety from everyone.
That's really helpful, Ashley. I mean, I must admit, the more information I get, the more my behaviour has changed with social media. I can tell you, given it feels at times like some of the platforms are just such peddling this stuff and creating an environment where it's peddled, even though they are saying they're responsible. There's an interesting comment here about interesting that in Australia we're ahead of the US on legislation, but the companies are based there. So it's sort of fascinating, it really, in a way, that we are using whatever power we have in a really clever way to get what we're going to need. But the companies where they're based, it seems like it's even more difficult for them to get the governments to get traction. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
I just wonder whether there's a final call from you, Ashley, apart from the, watch the documentary, stay informed. You mentioned some tools and resources. Maybe we can refer people to the Knox website or the websites that you would recommend that people use regularly to see what's being updated. What would you recommend people do, like in terms of their behaviour from here on?
Exactly what you've just said, actually, because I think even those of us that work in this space, sometimes it's only when you really start thinking about an issue and start to gather that information that your own behaviour starts to change. And how can we expect others to, if your own behaviour doesn't change? And that's because you're suddenly realising things that you hadn't understood properly before. So I think when your behaviour is changing, talk about that to people, because we're just the same as every other person trying to make our way through this. Most of us are not technologically advanced enough to understand the why that sits behind all this. But certainly there's things that we can do to be safer online and to make sure children and young people in our lives are safer online. And having conversations is so powerful in this space. I think sometimes people don't realize that just talking to your, friends and family that don't work in this space about online habits and you know, and what could be done and what is being done, like make that normal. And the same that other conversations around child safety, around stranger danger became very normal, to have those conversations at home, and don't shy away from it, you know. And I, as someone that works in this space, often in a public, you know, social setting, you'll start talking about this and sort of stop yourself because no one wants to hear it. But you know, people kind of do now. I think the public narrative is changing very quickly. It's very topical. It's in the media every day. So please talk about it and point people towards, you know, there's amazing resources. You don't have to do this. You know, we're not doing this on our own and individually. It's about community, and I think we can really make sure that we can support each other, and that this is done in a really good way to protect children and young people online. So I would definitely give a call out to the ACE, ACCCE. So type in the ace.gov.au. They have a huge number of resources and programs. Think You Know is fantastic. They go out to schools, speak to children and speak to teachers, speak to parents. Also the eSafety Commission, some great fact sheets around different platforms and games, and how do you as a parent, even, you know, when your child says I want Roblox, what can you do, you know, to make sure that the protections are in place when they go on it, and things like that. Like, and so those guides are really helpful. And then the childsafety.gov.au website has a lot of resources and will point you towards them. You know, Australia's done a lot of work in this space. We just need to use it. And yeah, we need to hold industry to account. And I think we're certainly doing that, leading the way globally, but we need to keep it up, and we need to not just sort of let them off the hook.
Thank you, Ashley. And I think I don't know all of you on this call, but you know, we live in the world. We're using social media. Our kids are using social media, and some of our children have been very negatively impacted by it. So it's not happening somewhere else. It's happening to us, and hopefully after today we can keep this conversation going and continue to do something meaningful. Thank you, Ashley. Can we say thank you to Ashley in whatever way suits you? A bit of applause and a bit of a thumbs up. Our Commonwealth people are doing great work, and I suspect not all of you knew about the work that they're doing. So it's good to get that out there to you today. So thank you, Ashley.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.
I'm now going to hand over to Mandy, who's going to introduce our next session. I don't think you get a break. I think we're just powering on. I think the team just felt that you didn't need one just yet. So we're going to keep moving. And this next session is learning through research and experience, and I think you're gonna really love this lineup. So thank you for staying with us, and please download all those resources that are in the chat, and we will make sure that you get all of this after this session so you can use it in your own time. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much for this morning, and thank you, Deb, and happy travels. Hello, my name is Mandy Charman, and I'm the Senior Manager of the Outcome Practice and Evidence Network. What a fabulous morning, sort of riveting in a, oh my God, watching a car crash type of way. But so importantly, to find out what range of resources are available and what is actually happening. Because so often we feel, I don't know about you, but I feel stuck because I feel like I don't know enough to be able to inform my children, who, like you, I've got children, and I don't know where to start. So just to second what Deb said, we will be providing across all of our presenters any resources they mention. We prepare an event review at Open, and then we distribute that along with the recording. So this also provides an opportunity for you to distribute that link to others that you might want to impact or influence, to start some of those conversations, because I mean, it's very clear our concern about upsetting people and having these difficult conversations is feeding straight into this problem. So I've taken a little bit of a leaf out of what we've heard this morning, in the earlier sessions, to take some more actions myself. Okay, on to our second session. Thank you so much for enduring not having a little break, and we'll see how we go. We just had too many wonderful speakers to share with you. That was the sort of idea. Okay. Our next session is called Learning from Research and Experience. For section 2, we will have 3 speakers with very different vantage points on these issues. Our researchers have worked with young people to understand their experience and strategies to manage their online safety. Wayne Holdsworth provides a unique parent's perspective on his personal journey with these risks and strategies to respond to our young people's needs as they juggle with these challenges. We are actually, Nicola, Amanda and Wayne are actually going to do a little bit of a question and answer panel. But firstly, we're going to hear from each of them individually about their work, because then you'll know where they're located. And I think that's always much more enjoyable. So I'm going to go through and introduce each, and then I'll hand over to each progressively for a little short snapshot of where they're at with what their area of expertise is. So firstly, I'm pleased to introduce Professor Nicola Henry, a leading social legal scholar and an ARC Future Fellow at the Social Equity Research Centre at RMIT University. Nicola's work focuses on image-based sexual abuse, exploring the limits of criminal law in addressing this form of abuse and non-legal measures and prevention strategies, particularly involving young people's insights on what works. Professor Amanda Keddie will follow Nicola. She's from Deakin University and focuses on social justice in education with an emphasis on gender equity and masculinity. Amanda's recent study, supported by the Australian E-Safety Commission, examined how young men critically engage with online content, both its risks and the critical perspectives they bring to their online experiences. So now we're sort of going further down into the deeper dive discussion about how this plays out. And finally, in this session, we will hear from Wayne Holdsworth, CEO of Smack Talk, and also basketball, works full-time in the basketball sports area. Smack Talk is a movement dedicated to suicide prevention. Wayne shares his personal lived experience to raise awareness and provide practical guidance on recognising signs of distress in others. Today, Wayne will highlight the importance of being trained to identify basic changes in people, developing strong listening skills, and understanding the steps to take to provide support. His insights aim to equip us with tools to make a real difference in our lives. First of all, we're going to hear from Professor Nicola Henry. Over to you, Nicola.
Thank you, Mandy. And just to check, you can hear me okay and you can see my slides? Okay, fantastic. Great. I'd like to start by acknowledging that today I'm speaking to you from the beautiful lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So I'm going to speak today for 10 minutes about image-based sexual abuse. This is really hard for me to speak with only 10 minutes because I could probably talk about this all day. So there'll be a lot of things that I just won't have time to speak about, but I know we've got the panel discussion at the end. So just really quickly, image-based sexual abuse essentially is an umbrella term that refers to 6 key behaviours involving intimate images. So first of all, there's creating intimate images without consent. So this can include things like deepfake pornography, using AI to either digitally alter an existing image or using generative AI to create an entirely new image to depict a person in the nude or engaged in a sexual act. The second form of image-based sexual abuse is taking, filming or photographing an intimate image of someone without their consent. So this can include things like upskirting and down blousing and other so-called creep shots. The third form of image-based abuse here on the screen is sharing intimate images without consent. Most of the research and the attention to date has been focused on non-consensual sharing. You may have heard of the term revenge porn. This is essentially what that term refers to, although we don't really use that term anymore. The fourth form of image-based abuse is threatening to share intimate images. This is known as sextortion. This can occur in the context of family and intimate partner violence. So, for example, an abusive partner who threatens to share intimate images of the victim to prevent them leaving the relationship, to prevent them from pursuing an intervention order or getting custody of children. But of course, it can also include the financial scam types of sextortion as well. The fifth form here is pressuring, threatening, or coercing someone into sharing their intimate images, and this is known as sexting coercion. And finally, we have the sharing of unsolicited and unwanted intimate images. This is known as cyber flashing. We conducted a survey in 2019 in Australia, New Zealand and the UK of over 6,000 respondents aged between 16 and 64. And what we found was that 1 in 3 respondents said that someone had their intimate images taken without their consent. 1 in 5 said that someone had shared their intimate images, and nearly 1 in 5 said that someone had threatened to share their images. We found that young people were twice as likely as those at over the age of 40 to be victims of image-based abuse. So those between the ages of 20 and 29 were the highest rates of victimisation according to our study. And then the next most likely group were those aged between 16 and 20. And just keeping in mind, we didn't survey people under the age of 16. What we also found was that men and boys had similar rates of victimisation as women and girls. But what was interesting is that the women and girls in our survey said that they experienced higher levels of harm from the abuse. So women and girls were more than twice as likely as men and boys to report being fearful for their safety from the perpetrator. Lesbian, gay and bisexual plus women and girls also experienced higher rates of victimisation, as well as more detrimental health and relational impacts and higher rates of harassment. And we also found that Indigenous and other ethnic and racial minorities were also more likely to report being a victim of image-based abuse. And finally, we found that perpetrators were more likely to be men and boys. We also did interviews with 75 victim survivors of image-based sexual abuse in Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. Victim survivors typically describe their experiences of image-based abuse as a social rupture. So this was really kind of a radical disruption to their lives. So for example, one participant described it as devastating, and she said it broke her. Another described it as life-ruining, while another participant called it a quiet trauma, saying that she felt like she'd been split into 2 separate people. A lot of the participants that we spoke to, the victim survivors we spoke to, mentioned significant deterioration of their mental health, which resulted in things like suicidal ideation, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, substance abuse, low self-confidence and low self-esteem, and significant shame. A few months ago, I interviewed this incredible young woman who was in her 20s. She had multiple experiences of sexual violence across her lifetime. She described being sexually abused as a child, and then when she was age 14, she was passed out unconscious at a party and her boyfriend raped her. And then at age 15, intimate images of her were circulated around her entire school by her boyfriend or ex-boyfriend at the time. And then after that, she was called a slut and a whore. She was completely chastised by her female friends. She was leered at and woohooed by the boys. And then her much older boyfriend was heartily congratulated by his peers, and the school did absolutely nothing. And this isn't the only time I've interviewed someone with an experience like this. This seems to be a common experience across the interviews that we've done, at least, with victim survivors of image-based abuse. Now, this young woman also told me about, in her 20s, about being filmed without her consent during a consensual sexual encounter. And later on, she discovered that the images had been shared amongst a group of the man's peers on Snapchat. And what she told me was really interesting. She told me that with the image-based abuse, the image itself can be never ending. And she made some comparisons between the sexual abuse she'd experienced as a child and the rape that she'd experienced as a teen. She said that with the images, there's this constant worry that those images will pop up somewhere. There's the unknown about who's seen those images and what those people are doing with their images, with her images. So she described a complete lack of self-control and also incredible social isolation. Not many victim survivors that we've spoken to have described not being supported by the people that are meant to support them, like parents and teachers and friends and so on. I do briefly want to also mention generative AI and AI-generated image-based abuse. This is receiving a lot of attention at the moment. Essentially, what that refers to is the creation or the sharing of realistic looking but fake photos or videos that uses AI to depict a person doing or saying something that they haven't said or done. Now, 5 years ago, creating a convincing deepfake required extensive time and expertise, a high-powered computer, as well as access to multiple images of the target person. So really, it was very difficult for for most people to create a convincing deepfake. But now you don't need to be a computer whiz. The tools and the technologies to create highly realistic deepfake imagery have become increasingly sophisticated and accessible to almost anybody. So I'm just showing you an image here just to give you an idea about how realistic an image can be and why deepfakes raises so many complex issues. And this was from a report from the ABC a few months ago. There were additional issues related to this because the image on the right is actually the face of an entirely fake person. But you can see how easily, how realistic the image on the right, which isn't the original image, how realistic it looks with the face kind of stitched on to the singer Alta Sweet Tabar's body. So you've got Alta Sweet Tabar on the left of the screen. Hopefully that's the same on your screen. But anyway, you can see how easy it is. You would have also heard about Nudify apps as well. So Nudify websites and Nudify apps are very easy to access. And they basically let anyone upload a photo of a real person to generate a fake but a photorealistic image of what that person might look like if they were undressed. So those tools can basically create deep fakes within seconds. I've got about a minute left, so I'll be super quick. But in terms of the laws, we do have laws in place. We've got image-based abuse laws. The federal telecommunications legislation was just recently, the bill was passed in Parliament to amend that to create a standalone image-based abuse offence. Now, that law only applies to adults. For children and young people, we have the child sexual abuse material laws, which mean that if someone accesses, possesses, creates, or shares sexualized images of children and young people under the age of 18, they can face up to 15 years of prison. I do want to just mention with the child sexual abuse laws, it does also include fictional or fake images, so including drawings, cartoons, or images that are generated using AI. And there was a case that went before the New South Wales Supreme Court, which basically upheld a conviction for child sexual abuse material, where the material accessed cartoons of children from The Simpsons, like the cartoon, the show The Simpsons. So it's actually just kind of interesting just to kind of think about how the law can be used in relation to deepfake images, not only of adults, but also of children as well. I'm totally out of time. I haven't had a chance to talk about education. I know that Amanda will be speaking about pornography, and I'm very happy during the discussion to kind of talk about some of the things that I think we need to do around education and prevention, as well as legislative and other responses to address this issue. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Nicola. And that's perfect because that's where our questions are going a little bit later, because that's immediately what occurred to me. Can I now just hand over to Professor Amanda Keddie?
So I'm Amanda Keddie. I'm Professor of Education at Deakin University. It's really great to be here. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we're meeting today. I'm speaking to you from Wurundjeri country. I'd like to pay my respect to elders past and present. So I'd like to highlight 4 key messages today. The first is there's currently widespread concerns about young men's online behaviours, especially relating to gender harms. Many young men are not passive consumers of harmful online content. They demonstrate a critical awareness of the gendered content they consume. We need more nuanced discussions about the gendered impacts of social media on young men. And we need to ask a question, how might young men's critical digital literacy promote safe, respectful and ethical online engagements? So these headlines highlight current concerns about young men's online behaviours, from schoolboys circulating AI deepfake pornography of their female classmates and teachers and revenge porn, to anxieties about the manosphere radicalising young men into misogyny. These issues have sparked renewed scrutiny on how young men are navigating online spaces. So this presentation features findings from a recent study supported by the Australian E-Safety Commission involving 117 young men. The research aimed to understand what it's like to be a young man online today, and it sought to better understand their journeys, aspirations and challenges as they navigate the personal and political landscapes of adolescence, manhood and contemporary society in a digital age. So just a bit about the method. We recruited some young men to actually do the online interviews with the young men. So we had 25 online focus groups, and the age group was between 16 and 21 years. And the focus group interviews sought to explore young men's online experiences. I've got the link there for if you would like to see the report, which goes into the method more extensively. So I wanted to focus today on some of the findings from the study that counter the view perpetrated sometimes in the media and in some research that young men are uncritical, uncaring and emotionally detached about the gendered dimensions of the online content they consume. I wanted to highlight how many young men actually are not simply passive consumers of harmful online content. They demonstrate a critical awareness of the gendered content they consume. I'll share findings from the study relating to algorithms, online pornography, and the sharing of intimate images. So, as I mentioned before, there's been a lot of concern recently in research and public debate about how algorithms are amplifying misogynistic content, especially for young men. So algorithms was a topic of conversation in our study. Importantly, many of the young men were critical of the ways in which algorithms shape the content that they see online. And we can hear from Christian here, who said algorithms kind of affirm your own voice instead of challenging you, and that can kind of lead to narrow perspectives. So there's a recognition here of algorithms creating echo chambers where users' existing beliefs weren't challenged. There was also recognition that as young men, they were fed particular gendered, heterosexualized content, even if they weren't interested. So many of the young men expressed awareness about how algorithms curated particular gendered content in their social media feeds. Many noted that online pornography was almost impossible to avoid. As one young man explained, pornography is kind of bleeding itself into all facets of the online space. Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, the algorithm really pushes that towards young men. Like, I know that speaking from experience, because every time I'm on social media, if something comes up in my reels, like a woman showing herself sexually, I always press not interested, but I've done that several times and I still get recommended those videos. Pornography was a topic of conversation. Most of the young men who spoke about online pornography saw it as highly negative. Some of the young men spoke about unintentionally encountering online pornography at an early age as an especially negative experience. Toby, in the second quote here, described himself as a victim of pornography. He said, "Unfortunately, I was one of those victims because I did see it on social media. I got curious and then it's taken me 6 years and just now I've been able to get over it." But the point is, that's how much of a toll it takes. It really can be a bit of an addiction. Many young men describe their consumption of pornography content as difficult to control, shameful, and sometimes as compulsive or addictive, which often had negative impacts on other parts of their lives. Brendan said, "But I think when you're young, you don't know its impacts. So that's sort of a desensitizing, getting kind of, I guess, addicted to it because some people do it a lot. And when you're a kid, it's hard to self-control and you know you're doing it on your own, in your room and away from everyone else so no one else knows." And then Jordan said, there really isn't any benefit to online pornography. And, you know, after you've watched it, you feel terrible. You feel good watching it, but then it's like immediately regret it afterwards. It takes a toll on you over time. And that's why a whole lot of young men have anxiety and depression around all this stuff as well, because they really don't have a realistic expectation and understanding of what a relationship is. Relating to Jordan's remarks about relationships, some of the young men critically reflected on pornography in terms of creating problematic perceptions of women and consent and distorted views of intimacy and respect for relationships. As one young man said, it makes you view them, women, more as a sexual object rather than a human being. I think a lot of people grow up with it and then they end up not having total respect for women as just regular people at the end of the day. And Jess also added, pornography affects men's idea of what consent is because there's no consent in porn, and so they don't have a real concept of it. So I just wanted to say that the findings I'm presenting to you here reflect a more critical response to pornography's content than sometimes we hear in studies about young men. So the other thing that we found in this studies, so the interviews prompted the young men to talk about sharing of intimate images. While a few of the young men in the study sort of felt comfortable and confident about sharing intimate images, many of them noted that this required significant trust. As one of the young men, Lucas, noted, obviously trust plays a big part in it. I'm hesitant to do it until I definitely know I can trust that person. And Toby said, I just think you have to be really careful when you do that, the type of relationship you have with that person, and can you really trust them? So these comments are consistent with other research on young men's sexting practices that emphasize consent, mutuality, and respect, and contrast with the notion that young men are careless when sharing images online. Many of the young men in this study spoke of the importance of trust, intimacy, and in-person connection when sharing intimate images online. And some of the young men actually commented on the gender differences in how shared images are perceived and received. As Omar said, I'd be pretty happy if I received an unsolicited pic. If a girl sends an unsolicited photo, a lot of guys are going to start messaging that girl, whereas if a guy is known for sending an unsolicited photo, they'll be known as a creep for the rest of his life. So just wrapping up, these reflections and the earlier ones about online pornography, I think, and young men's critique about algorithms are positive examples of how young men are deploying a digital literacy in ways that reflect a critical awareness of the gendered content that they consume online. So this was an encouraging finding of our research. While, to be sure, some of the young men perpetuated gendered harms in their online experiences, many showed a robust critique of the gendered content they experienced online. As other researchers noted, we need more nuanced discussions about the gendered impacts of social media on young men, especially amid public and media discourse that positions them as uncritical, uncaring, and emotionally detached about these issues. I'd like to end by reiterating the importance of posing questions such as, how might young men's critical digital literacy promote safe, respectful, and ethical online engagements? And how can this engagement be strengthened as a resource for helping young men to navigate the current digital landscape? Thank you very much.
That was lots of food for thought, actually, and not what I expected. So that's really interesting. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. But first we'll hand to Wayne. Wayne Holdsworth, would you like to explain more about your work?
Thanks very much, Mandy, and I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm Wayne Holdsworth and I reside in Melbourne, Victoria. My background is a sports administrator for the last 25 years. I come from an AFL background, and for the last 6 years, I've been CEO of basketball down here in Victoria. I do have three passions: my family, the community work I do via my work in sport, and certainly now suicide prevention, as we lost our 17-year-old son, Mac, through suicide on October the 24th, 2023. He was also sexually extorted. So there was three things that I could have done as a human being. There was the first thing which crossed my mind for about the first week after Mac passed away, and that was to take my own life. And fortunately, I was connected with a fantastic suicide prevention counsellor, and I speak to him on a regular basis still, ever since November of last year. The second thing I could have done, and I see this a lot when I've met many parents that have been in a similar situation to my family, has been that they've just had no passion for life anymore. They find it really difficult to smile. They find it very difficult to move on with their lives at all. And that's some 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years after their son or daughter took their own life. And I totally understand that. And the third thing that I could have done was to use Mac's death as a catalyst to do more in suicide prevention. And that's what I've decided to do. So since January, February of 2024, I set up a not-for-profit company called Smack Talk, and the MAC in Smack Talk is in reference to Mac. I still work full-time in basketball, and I present to sporting organisations, corporates, schools around suicide prevention with a different presentation depending upon the audience and age, obviously. I've presented now to over 7,620 people as of yesterday, and over 2,000 of those are children. I've become a suicide prevention ambassador, so if there's something topical that the media, for example, want to get a response from a lived experience person, then I'm quite happy to be that person. And I'm also involved with the News Corp initiative, Let Kids Be Kids, which have lobbied the government since about February on raising the age to at least 16 for access to some social media platforms. But as Anne Hollonds said quite articulately, I and many that I know are just wanting to do what's in the best interest of our children here in Australia. So my lived experience was on the 24th of October 2023, some 47 weeks ago. Mac took his own life at home and had planned it around about 6 to 7 weeks out. And the only two people left in the home at that morning were myself and my 14-year-old daughter. And, you know, I've done some difficult things in my life, and I'm sure I will, but none as hard, nor I never will do anything harder than after finding him going out into the kitchen and telling my 14-year-old daughter that we'd lost her brother. And with regard to the extortion took place when he was just under 16. It took 30 minutes for him to share a nude photo in his face to a woman he thought was 18 that had done exactly the same thing. And also in that same 30 minutes, he was hacked. And after that 30 minutes, the conversation dried up and he received a phone call from what he thought might have been that young woman, but it turned out to be a 47-year-old man from Liverpool, New South Wales, that said that I have your photo. I want you to deposit $500 into this bank account. And if you don't, I will distribute the photos. And of course, Mac panicked and paid the $500 immediately, but it didn't stop there. Another few minutes went by and Mac was asked to send another $500 to this same person, same bank account. But this person then finished with this comment, that if you don't send that money to this particular bank account, your parents will hate you and you'll want to kill yourself. And so when I speak to school groups and particularly secondary college, you know, I talk about social media and I talk about the perils of social media and the responsibility they have and we have as adults to ensure that we're safe on social media. One of the things that comes out regularly after the session that I run from these young people is that they weren't aware of the predators out there prepared to terrorise them. And so it's a surprise to them. And so, as we've all said throughout today, education is going to be the key here, not only to children, but also to adults. With regard to the social media and the parents understanding social media a bit better, I talk about, asking kids, open-ended questions, not just, are you okay? And I'm not critical of the campaign. It's a fabulous campaign that's now extended to are you okay any day, which is fantastic. But it's a closed question. And I ask my son that question most days, particularly after he was extorted, because he changed dramatically subsequent to that experience. We need to be asking open-ended questions to our children to be able to invoke proper answers that we can work with to determine just how they are travelling. I also talk about good listening skills that I've researched and around being in not the moment, but being in their moment when someone approaches you or you identify someone that's struggling, to be in their moment and to turn that thing called the mobile phone off totally so it doesn't distract you. And also then teaching people the process to follow if you do discover that somebody says to you that they don't want to be here anymore. And when you ask them, have they got suicidal thoughts, and they say yes, the process to follow to ensure they get help really quickly, and your role that you play in that. And of course, that's the role that we as parents and we as parents teach our children, and educators like me teach as many people that will listen. But also the government needs to be involved. And it really is music to my ears that they have become involved. It's terrific that they're now going to introduce a law. Then comes a challenge of being able to ensure that that law is upheld. And we know that all the tech giants will be working already around how to get around that. And the kids are really clever and they'll get around it too. So it's a combination of many things. And we also have to have the tech giants engaged in this improvement. But in my opinion, I think we must assume that tech giants are not serious about child safety, because Antigone Davis, the Vice President of Meta some few weeks ago, said that she didn't believe social media damages children. Well, I'm here to disagree with that. It does. And the many people that I've met, particularly in the last 6 or 7 months, that have had similar experiences to me, not necessarily sexual extortion, but other social media platforms that have made it really difficult for those children to survive, and they've taken their own life. So I'm here to say that they have got a role to play, a significant role to play in this challenge that we're all faced with. We would, as parents, not allow undesirables to come into our homes, not come into our children's bedrooms and shut the door, or come into bathrooms and shut the door either. So we can't let social media platforms have that same right. Ford wouldn't allow cars coming off their production line if they knew that those cars were unsafe, that the safety belt didn't work, or there was no safety belt. Yet we allow tech companies and platforms to infiltrate our children, let alone our adults. So we need to protect our kids now. And when I speak to any group, whether that be adults and more particularly adults, there's only 8 weeks or so left before Christmas. I'm encouraging parents not to plan to buy their children their first mobile phone. I'm encouraging them to buy them a new basketball. Thank you.
So much food for thought across all of those presentations, and so powerful an image, Wayne, because that's exactly the situation we're in. We've got a remaining 15 minutes. And so what I might do, instead of swapping around multiple questions, I'm just going to pose one question. And Wayne, just give you a breather for a minute. I'll pose it to Nicola and Amanda first, and then we'll move through. This is really about, you've all done extensive work in this space from different vantage points. Really wondering if you could reflect on your work and surface what you think the key critical actions or takeaways are in relation to supporting young people to navigate this new landscape, and what your Christmas has come today system change might be in that space. So you can use, we'll have about 5 minutes each. So have a little pause. We can all go, let's do our Zen breathing. Just a pause. Nicola or Amanda, who would like to go first?
I'm happy to go first. Thank you, Wayne, for sharing your story. It's very powerful. And I agree with you, Wayne. I think the first approach is open communication, asking children, students, open questions about why they're using particular apps, what they're using particular apps for, having the conversation open. You can't have a critical conversation without that environment of trust, of support, of safety. If you want those conversations, that needs to be crucial in any sort of education. So broadly, my focus is education. So in terms of respect for relationships education and sexuality education and teaching for gender justice, which is my area, the first kind of step is to create an environment of safety and trust where students, children feel like they can be free to talk and to express themselves in ways that are non-judgmental. And then the adult potentially, or the older person or the educator or facilitator or teacher can express strategic empathy about what those children are going through. And then it's about opening up the conversation and broadening perspectives, offering multiple perspectives. In the case of social media and algorithms, and that's where the research was really heartening with these young men, it is about critiquing the architectures that curate this content. It is about critiquing the use of AI for particular representations. It is about just opening space to be really critical, and that's what we call critical digital literacy. And I think it can be a critical digital literacy that is informed by social justice, kind of ethical, safe use of technology. My big want in this space in terms of education, and I guess for parents as well, but for education, is supporting teachers to have the professional development and the important kind of support for them to actually do this work in classrooms, because we do have great curriculum in this space and more broadly in the space of respect for relationships, but teachers are really burdened and they need support, they need professional learning, and I think parents do as well, and that's where those resources that we mentioned earlier are really important. So the safety resources around parents and just getting to know the different platforms and the different social media apps and what they do, and the parental kind of controls and what they are and how they can work. Yeah, I think that's me.
Some pretty good suggestions there, and clearly something you've been working on for some time. Yeah. Nicola, did you have some reflections?
Yeah, I also wanted to say thank you to Wayne. Wayne, I saw you on the project, I think it was a couple of months ago, and I'm glad I'm holding it together today, but I was very affected by what happened to you, and I just want to thank you for all the incredible work that you're doing. It's really important. I'm also interested in this topic of sextortion, as well as obviously other forms of image-based abuse. And I guess what I would say is probably, well, really what Amanda and Wayne have already said around open communication. For me, my key word here would be connection. I was listening to this like a podcast of a therapist called Heidi Rogers, and she was talking about when you're a parent, you kind of get the sack from your child in the early teens, and you have to kind of apply for a new role, which is kind of like consultant, as opposed to kind of the person who's kind of deciding all the things. And I've certainly noticed that as a parent, I have kind of turned, like, I think I've been accepted for the role of consultant. And it's like this, the analogy she gives is that as a parent, you're kind of walking on top of the cliff while your child is down the bottom on the forest floor, and you're kind of there to kind of guide them through the difficulties of teenagehood. And if your child is open to it, you can give advice and so on, and your child can also ask for advice. And anyway, I'm doing a terrible job of describing the analogy, but I just think it's a really important one around keeping the lines of connection open, so that if your child is going through something difficult, that they know that they can turn to you. And I think one of the difficulties here, I'm not an expert on children, by the way, and young people, but what I do know as a parent of a teenager, that taking devices away can be quite tricky territory of disconnection, particularly for some children. And I think that's the other point I'd like to kind of say is around kind of, every child is different, particularly kids kind of neurodivergent or on the spectrum, have mental health issues, that there are some real challenges as parents in terms of navigating gaming, online gaming and social media. I certainly have a lot of challenges there. But one of the things we're really focusing on in my kind of personal life is really around keeping the lines of connection open and not kind of threatening every 2 seconds to stop the Vodafone subscription or turn the Wi-Fi off. All those kind of threats, sometimes, my child at least, isn't always effective. I also wanted to just say one other thing too around digital literacy, which includes porn literacy. So really giving young people the skills to think critically. I know Amanda's spoken about this as well, to enable them to ask questions, to ask very critical questions about access to digital information and content. Questions like, is it trustworthy? Is it real? Is it fake? Should it be shared? What economic structures underpin the hosting or the selling of digital content and goods? What power asymmetries are at play? So really getting young people to engage with those critical questions. And that's also in relation to pornography as well. And Amanda is is an expert on this compared to me. But I think what I've discovered is that a lot of the shame and fear-based messaging and abstinence messaging is not effective with young people. And some of the research with young people is very much that, when adults kind of do that fear-mongering and they do that kind of abstinence-based approach to sex and to pornography, that it actually kind of breaks the lines of communication and just kind of severes the connection. And I know these are all very difficult things for parents and educators and researchers to kind of get their head around. There's some really very difficult, this is a very difficult area. And I think I'd just say one more thing is around judgment and blame. Sometimes there's a lot of discourse, particularly amongst parents, around social media and online gaming, pornography. And I think we need to be careful around that, because all of our children are different and they have different needs and they push back on different things. And sometimes, as parents, we're doing our very best to, to help our young people. But it is very, very challenging. And I think we should all acknowledge that and all be kind of kind to each other as we navigate this difficult space. But thank you. That's it from me.
Thank you. Yeah. Wayne, over to you.
Thanks very much, Mandy, and thanks, Amanda and Nicola. I've learned so much today, and I really appreciate just being here. Really, you're the experts, and I've learned so much. I guess the thing that I'd just like to say is that, in talking to so many parents, over 6,000 parents, I've now got an understanding of what they're struggling with and some of the things they're struggling with, and it's, with their kids being on social media after school for, 3 to 6 hours a night, their social skills aren't as, developed as perhaps they'd like them to be. And then also the pressure on the kids to conform with what other kids are doing at school and their friends. And I also find it, you know, as a parent myself, that I didn't know the dangers out there. I didn't know, you know, apart from the isolation of, you know, through COVID and so forth, of being, you know, that interaction wasn't prevalent. I didn't know that the dangers out there. And when I speak to parents out there, you know, as much as the programs that, you know, Ashley spoke about and the hit rate, it's tremendous. We've just got to really push that, because a lot of the parents I speak to have got no idea around the fact that, you know, there's kids as young as 5, boys as young as 5 here in Australia that are addicted to violent porn. The girls as young as 7 that have anorexia because of, you know, the body shaming and so forth on social media. And so they're the things that we don't know and we need to be educated on. So I suppose that education part is really important. But what I'd just like to finish on is that, you know, until the law comes in, until, you know, the tech giants come to the realisation that they have a responsibility, that, you know, we as educators and parents, you know, it's up to us, you know, it's back to us, the community, and, you know, to ask your kids those open-ended questions, to be as honest, but be a really good role model yourself, and, you know, to ensure that, you know, you're not on social media for 4 or 6 hours at night, that at the dinner table the phones are away in a bucket somewhere or whatever. Those really good practices, and lead from the front, you know, because, you know, if I knew then what I knew now, you know, I'm sure that things might have been a lot different. And you know, kids are under enormous pressure these days, and, you know, expectations are much higher. They're under scrutiny. The transparency is enormous, you know, through social media. So, you know, if kids make a mistake and they are extorted or you know, sexually extorted, then they're the victims. And I don't know whether parents still get that. They are. Police are great. They understand that they're the victims, and, you know, they need to be hugged and told them they are the victims, and we'll do everything we possibly can to look after them. Thanks, Mandy.
Thank you so much, Wayne. This whole topic is so moving and challenging, isn't it? So lots of food for thought. One thing to take away is the huge amount of work that's going on this topic to help us navigate the challenges we're experiencing and ahead. And I'm just going to start delving in and being a bit more fearless about having some of those conversations, because sometimes teenagers aren't very interested in talking about these things with their parents either. So all of you have exposed a whole heap of different options. Now I can actually also see this is our area of, we need to do more activities and more sharing on. So hopefully we'll have a further opportunity to dig further into this content. We're back. Hopefully that was a long enough break for you. Thanks for staying to hear session 3. We now have the Prevention United Youth Advisory Group members, a group of young people who have worked extensively with Prevention United on exactly these issues, in providing advice, in thinking through and shaping a submission in response to the proposed legislative changes. So they're highly informed and very motivated. And as usual, whenever you hear young people speak, you just say, oh my God, it's so clear when they say it. So I want to first introduce you to our presenters today. They're four brilliant people who have worked with Prevention United, which is an organisation that focuses on promoting young people's mental health and wellbeing through education and advocacy. Our presenters today have been at the forefront of providing advocacy advice to Prevention United. Excellent. Who developed a policy brief that challenges the simplicity of the media narrative that young people's poor mental health is due to smartphones and social media use. They will share their insights from their work with Prevention United first, and then we will have a Q&A session about the complexity of online safety and ensuring the voices of children and young people are part of the solution. Welcome Lauren Jackson, Zinni Hunt, Alana Sander, and Em Howells, and thank you so much for being part of our journey today. Just a little bit more about each of them. Alana is a youth engagement worker, at Youth Live for Life and is passionate about advocating for more youth mental health prevention initiatives. Em is a third-year undergraduate psychology student with a passion for mental health and human rights. Em also serves as the president of Amnesty International at Monash Uni. Lauren is a dedicated student currently pursuing a degree in psychology at Monash Uni, aiming to be a clinical psychologist. With a passion for mental health and advocacy, she is actively involved in the youth advisory group with Prevention United. And Zini is a university student with lived experience in many disadvantaged areas and is dedicated to advocating for young people. He works with the Education Equity Alliance, Prevention United's Youth Advisory Group, Co-Health's Youth Advisory Committee, and Uniting's Young Person Advisory Group. Welcome. We're really keen to hear from you all.
Thank you so much for introducing us. Lovely to meet everyone on here. I'll just share out my screen. There we go. Awesome. So today's session, we're basically talking about our own lived experience with social media. So I would just like to first pay my respect to all of the lands that we are on at the moment and pay our respect to the elders past, present and emerging, as well as paying respect to people with lived and living experiences of mental health issues or trauma with social media. So I'll move on. So I know you've heard a little bit of Prevention United already, but it's an organisation all about the promotion and prevention of mental health issues. And you don't really find a lot of organisations working on it, and it's such an amazing opportunity for us young people to be on it. A part of the work that they do is releasing these policy briefs, and all of their topics are based off our youth advisory group. So we choose what is the most important things for us to be talked about. So this uses a mix of the evidence from past research as well as our lived experiences, and I'm sure you'll be able to find it on the website. And we also have the Youth Advisory Group. We had another image in the corner, but it's not there anymore. But it's a wonderful group of young people, which I'm so glad to be a part of. And we work on the policy briefs as well as our own little projects as well. Like Lauren will talk about that more now. Oh, there we go.
Thank you so much, Em. So I'll be talking to you guys about our survey. So our idea emerged from our discussions within our meetings about trying to amplify our voices and the experience of young people. We recognized that we were only a group of 10 young people, even though we came from diverse backgrounds. We wanted to encompass as much young people's voices and opinions as we possibly could. This survey tried to capture the perspectives of lived experience as well as changes that young people would like to see in society, as we recognise that young people are frequently left out of and excluded from these critical conversations that affect them greatly. So for the survey, we had nearly 600 participants, all based around Australia, aged between 16 and 25, completed the survey in regards to positive and negative effects of their mental health, what they want to see changed in government, advice that they have for parents and people going forward of how they can better support young people in regards to the impact social media has on them, both positive and negative. Unfortunately, we don't have any results that we can share with you guys today. If you guys are excited about the survey as much as we are, I encourage you guys to copy the link below. It is so you can sign up to our newsletter, and then you'll get active updates of when the social media, when the survey will be released, as well as other exciting projects from Prevention United. Pass it over to Alana.
Thanks, Lauren. Now I'm going to talk about one of our social media policy briefs, which is the impact of screen time and social media on the mental health of young Australians. So we were a part of creating this policy brief, inputting our lived experience as young people and our experience with social media. So there's a bunch of different parts of the survey and, the policy brief, and it really explores the benefits and risks to young people's mental health associated with social media and different aspects of the digital environment. Highlights of the policy brief, which we highly recommend that you read yourself. It is such a great insight into the perspectives of social media for young people. there's a background on there about mental health and the increase in mental health issues amongst young people, but describing that causation doesn't necessarily equal correlation. And then it also talks about the uses and attitudes, comparing the attitudes of young people and older people as well on social media and the perceived negative impacts. It also talks about the benefits and risks, which we'll cover a bit more in our presentation. And then we also cover the factors that this has on young people, and that as more research occurs, the link between the online world and mental health is not as straightforward as we think. It also highlights what might be causing these discrepancies, and also how we should respond to these potential risks and benefits, and that it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all policy solution. So highly recommend reading our paper. Yeah, and now I'm going to pass on to Zinni for when we'll talk about the pros and cons of social media.
Thank you, Alana. Yeah, just for everyone, the work that these three have done on the policy brief and on the survey is really good work, so definitely check that out when you get the chance. Just to get the ball rolling on our views on social media, we all together put a little pros and cons list of what we see as some of the biggest positives of social media, as well as what we see as some of the biggest downsides of being on social media. The highlight for me was having connections with friends. I went to about like a dozen schools throughout my primary and high school, and every time you move hours and hours away, it is very difficult to maintain those friendships, of course, and being able to communicate with them through social media was one of the only ways that some of those friendships were maintained. I think Alana had something to add.
Yeah, thanks, Zinni. So I'm going to touch on coming from a regional area and the positives of having social media access, I guess, for mental health as well. So I come from a regional area, about 4 hours from Melbourne and about 30 kilometers from a supermarket or a school. So very, very remote. Social media was so important for me growing up as a young person in a regional area, because I was able to talk to my friends and connect with people outside of the four walls of my house, which was great. And also you can access so many mental health resources online that are just not available in regional areas. And I just also wonder, if the ban does go forward, what plan there will be for young people in regional areas to access this information, because it's just at the moment not accessible in regional areas. Suicide rates are really high in regional areas as well, due to isolation and poor access to healthcare, natural disasters, etc., etc. Also, being on social media allowed me to connect with people who I met at my sports clubs and external places for other than school. And that also allowed me to have lots of creative outlets, which is another point I wanted to touch on. Being online allowed me to collaborate with lots of artists. I write music myself, and it's just such a great tool for young people to be able to connect with people that they might necessarily get to connect with, especially coming from a regional area. And there's so many great resources online about mental health education and for neurodivergent people to access, such as examples of Project Rocket and the amazing work they do in creating resources and platforms to teach young people how to navigate using online spaces. Yeah, now I'm going to pass on to Lauren to share a few of her pros and cons as well.
Thank you, Alana. I was going to touch on women's health. For me personally, being a young woman and experiencing, hormonal symptoms like difficulties, you don't really get a lot of education on that in high school. You can go to a GP, but they will kind of give you a very generic answer. So I found social media very helpful to connect with other young women that were experiencing similar things to me, as well as reach out and hear other people's input of how they found resources and things to best support them and what they were going through at that time. So I feel like it was a very important thing that I had growing up, so I could relate to other people that were experiencing the same thing. I'll pass it over to Em.
Thank you. And all of these I wanted to talk about because they're all so relevant to all of us. It's not just an individual having this, it's for all young people. One part for me that's really close to my heart is I'm a queer person and I didn't really have that much support or education around me growing up physically, but I was able to get that online. I was able to find out what everything meant and to get the support, as well as for queer health is something that's never really mentioned in schools, or it's never really found anywhere, but we find a lot of that on social media and it's really been helpful. And I couldn't imagine not having social media and going through that as a young person. So thank you so much for listening to our little presentation. We'll go on to the questions now. Yeah. Thank you, Mandy. I'm sure you're...
It has to happen at least once a day, doesn't it, with somebody? Take yourself off it. Okay. Thank you very much. So many diverse reasons and benefits for your engagement and the value of social media and other types of online delivery mechanisms. I also noted a whole heap of cons too, and I think you're very aware of that's what we've been talking largely about. Okay, so first of all, we've actually tic-tacked about the questions the group wants to answer, and they're very diverse. So how do you feel, Lauren, about the recent Australian federal government announcement regarding minimum age requirements for social media? What are your thoughts on that?
I feel like it's a very good question. I personally felt quite disappointed. I can see where they're coming from in a way that they're trying their best to support young people in a way that they think is beneficial. But I feel like it's very disappointing because you can see that this was created without young people in mind and what is beneficial for them. I feel like if this ban was to happen, that it wouldn't stop people from using social media, and it hasn't in the past. I remember when I was younger, Facebook had their minimum age requirement of like 13. And I had so many friends sign up for Facebook and are, 20, 21 now, but they're getting happy birthday messages of 24, 25. So it hasn't stopped back then. So I don't think it would be beneficial now.
Do you have other ideas about what you think might be beneficial in that sort of regulatory space?
I think there should be more regulations for social media, as well as more open conversations with parents, teachers about how to customize your social media to you, know like how to block people, ban people, report things. I feel like it's not really talked about a lot, especially like when you're younger. You just feel like you have to accept whatever comes onto your feed, but it's very customizable and you can seek support anywhere. So yeah,
taking more of the reins yourself, basically. Zinni and Alana, what advice, this sort of segues very nicely, would you give to policymakers about how they can make sure young people are included in discussions about online safety and how we can ensure those voices are genuinely heard and acted upon?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, it is definitely something that should be happening. It is super, super important. Working in this space in the child and family welfare sector, we do see that happen and be a successful thing with Prevention United's Youth Advisory Group, working with United's Youth Advisory Group recently to develop their therapeutic model of care, which has been really successful. We see that having young people have a say in what really matters to them and what will affect them, you need to hear from those people. That is the target demographic of who you're going to be working with. And if you aren't listening to your target demographic, it's not going to work. You can't have adults decide everything for young people that they might know absolutely nothing about. And I think, yeah, in terms of making sure that that's done successfully, is ensuring that it is not done in just like a tokenistic way of, yeah, we had young people here, they said this, and we listened to them. You need to have someone regulating that and ensuring that the voices are actually heard and listened to and taken into account with decision making, and yeah, just with everything. It is so important to have voices of young people heard if you're working with young people and if it's for young people.
Yeah, 100%. And additionally, like going off of that is like listening to the voices of young people directly is so different from just anticipating how young people will react or contribute to discussions. For example, there was like a recent survey by Reach Out about social media and concerns about social media for young people. And just for an example, out of parents and carers, about 60% reported they were concerned about the social media use, whereas only about 34% of young people actually said that social media was an issue of concern. So that kind of just shows the difference between the actual, like, if you actually ask a question to young people how social media actually affects them, and then asking them further ways that they can that they want change. And like young people as well, in that same survey, they ranked a lot more issues that happen externally to social media as a lot higher. They actually ranked social media 24th. So I think even asking them what other impacts can be done to impact their mental health better, than rather than just assuming it's social media.
In your experience, how can adults, and we've got lots of practitioners here, lots of parents and teachers and policymakers, better support young people in managing the risks and benefits of being online, balancing monitoring their children's online activity with respecting privacy?
It's really difficult because that's the thing, is you've got to think there is a lot of negative things, and we're not trying to ignore that. I've had bad experiences on there, but I've also had really good experiences. And I find when there's something that's new, you don't completely understand it and it has negative things, we just want to ban it. We want to get rid of it from our household, want to ban them, policy, family. The thing is, as a young person, if we want to go on social media, we will find a way. I think we're very, very sneaky and fast at finding ways with technology. And it ends up, I've heard experiences of people who their parents banned them from social media, but they still used it anyway. And then they got into trouble. They were having harassment, but they couldn't go to their mum or to their dad to ask for help. And that's the worst case scenario. It's more about trying to have open communications and be like, hey, I know you're on there. And maybe if from a really young age to be like, I want to be with you at the same time until I feel like, you know how to block, know how to do all those things. But you really just open conversation, be like, hey, it's okay. If you're going to do this, just let us know if something wrong happens. Yeah.
That was actually your echoing earlier conversations.
Sorry.
About, yeah. Oh no, that's really powerful. Because the ability to reach out is the fundamental protective factor, isn't it? I suppose on that case, we also spoke earlier about the responsibility of online platforms and what they should be doing to protect young people from harmful content, while still allowing the sort of freedoms that bring young people a rich life and ability to connect with each other. So Alana, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is something that we actually talk about a lot in our youth advisory group, and we came up with a few solutions in the policy brief that I shared earlier. We really want online platforms to change the ability to feed, tailor the feed to what we would like to see, whether that's banning certain words or hashtags or being able to customize the apps. I think that would be a really great way forward. We also spoke that we really want the online platforms to empower us rather than tear us down or tear anyone down, and to teach real world skills that we will utilize throughout life. Yeah, we also are really strong on education for young people and also adults as well on how to safely use online platforms. And also have the ability to block and report certain content, so we can have more exposure to positive content and tailor it the way that we would like.
Lauren, would you have something to add there? Oh, it was M, actually, sorry.
Yeah, it's all about, like, I would love to be able to change my own social media so I only see my friends, and that's not even me. It's good to be able to do that, so then I know at least it's all safe, it's all there. Social media already has some really good tools, like if someone's saying things about eating disorders or self-harm, you can report it through the app anonymously, and then they'll reach out with different resources to the person, which yet again, they may not get that if it's not online. But yeah.
it's sort of interesting because one of the earlier speakers was talking about a respondent, a young man talking about rejecting sort of gendered or violent sort of content, and it just kept coming anyway. So yeah, so there's some responsibility there, isn't there? So Lauren, what are some of the biggest challenges you face when navigating the online world, and what type of strategies or tools do you think might be helpful?
I think one of the biggest challenges, especially as a young woman, you can be very influenced by social media, as well as like the beauty standards and harmful trends that circle around about like being thin or like having a certain body type or looking a certain way. So I did notice that start to impact my mental health as well as like friends around me. But it wasn't until I started engaging with like more body positive stuff on my social media that I did see that feed kind of change a little bit. Of course, you still get fed some harmful trends, but like Em said, if you can report, block, that is really, really helpful. I think, yeah, if you can unfollow them, block them, that is what I would do. There's also like doom scrolling, which I feel like a lot of people can just, sit there and scroll for hours. It's like you get sucked into this little rabbit hole of like social media. But I feel like it's really, really helpful for me, at least. I set like timers on my app so I can be more conscious of what I'm engaging in and how long I'm spending in that app.
Do you, Alana, have something to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's quite a common, I guess, issue, doom scrolling. I'm sure we can all relate to it. But yeah, I feel like that's probably one of my biggest struggles, definitely on social media, getting stuck in a deep loop. But I feel like managing it is like anything, it does take work, but also takes a lot of education in myself. It's a big journey that I had to learn to help manage those challenges. But I think also like it's great to know that sometimes the online environment is not that different from the offline environment. And I think like the e-safety commissioner recently kind of spoke about social media and in an analogy compared to the beach, where it's like, the beach is a dangerous place. There's a possibility that you might drown, but you're not going to ban young people from going to the beach. You're going to get lifeguards. You're going to teach young people how to swim. You're going to get parents to watch those young people. I think the same thing should be for social media. I think banning it is not the solution ahead, and rather we need to think about the ways that we can prevent problems from happening through safety and through education. So I feel like that's going to be a really great way to help manage the challenges of social media in the future.
Yeah, harness the good of it while coming up with better strategies to do the management. We are at the cusp of it, aren't we, really? I mean, this has escalated, but in 50 years, they'll probably look back at us and go, well, right then, that's when you had the technological innovation that caused all these issues, similarly to other moments of technological innovation, perhaps.
Yeah, I think my mum was recently saying that back in the day, I think if you listen to rock music, people were like, oh, you're crazy and whatever, it affects your mental health. And I feel like maybe that could be happening right now with social media.
Yeah, possibly they viewed it the same way back then, but we go, no, this is a real danger. And Zini, this is an interesting, how do you balance your personal responsibility for your own online safety with the expectation that platforms or governments will protect you? So they get straight to the rights protection sort of nexus.
Yeah, I think it's a really important topic to speak about. And the online space is like such a wide space that like you need to be knowledgeable about how to stay safe or how to keep your kids safe or your friends safe or whoever it is that you're concerned about. And I think, but I think that there is also the expectations that these platforms do something to keep that space regulated, which some do really well, some aren't so great at it. But yeah, I don't think that the regulations that should be in place should be to just not allow them on social media at all. It's still going to happen. If there's, say that the age range is cut off at 14, as soon as you're 15, the same stuff can still happen. I think it's more important to keep the space as a whole as a safe space for everyone, and to be able to do things like report accounts and actually have action come from that, or not allow certain things on platforms where it shouldn't be, or have the options to block accounts and block topics as a whole, which we see some platforms again do pretty well, and some, like you were speaking on before, you can block it, but sometimes it still comes up. Like, there is clear problems in the systems that these platforms use to regulate stuff, how we are wanting it to be regulated. Yeah.
Do you think it's well known amongst young people of your age what platforms are safer or better regulated than others? I'm just curious.
I think in a general sense, not so much. Like, for all of the big platforms, you know, you've got Snapchat, Instagram, whatever else young people use, there are definitely some that are viewed as not as safe. Like, for example, Twitter, most young people know that anything can be posted on there. You could open up Twitter and there could be really vile videos, really vile stuff being said, and it is not taken down. I think that TikTok usually regulates what is posted a little bit better. You're not going to see super crude stuff on there, or anything super violent is usually taken down pretty well. But yeah, just in a general sense, I don't think that everyone knows what platforms you are completely safe. Well, you're not completely safe on any, but what platforms you're more protected on, or what platforms are more risky to be using.
Yeah, I would expect adults would be. I loved your analogy that adults are also involved in doom scrolling and all the other things. So yeah, I don't think adults are really well informed either. So okay, well, the final question is, and feel free, all of you, to provide your thoughts on this, but we'll start with Em. What would you like the people here today, which is a very broad mix of people, to take away from this discussion?
Yeah, I would definitely take away, we're acknowledging that there's a lot of bad things that do happen on social media, but you can't ignore the wide range of positive effects, and banning it is not going to help. What we need to have is to find what these positive effects are and find a way to boost it and make it happen and be reached to more people, but then get the negatives and try to diminish it, try to use different ways. But when we're thinking of all these ways to kind of promote and to get rid of this bad stuff, you need to be talking to young people. I hear all the time, everyone's just so frustrated when you don't listen to young people, because it's really clear that it's not going to work. If we don't feel like it works for us, we're just going to ignore it. We're going to find another way around it. And partly, like before, talking about, which is the safest platforms, we'll just go on the platforms that people use the most or that we are allowed to use. So yeah, please listen to us. And for the parents, just please don't ban it. Have open communications with your children. It's going to do a world of good.
Did anyone else have last thoughts? I've got a few questions, by the way, so this is just the last open mic opportunity.
No, I agree with everything that Em said, that I don't believe the ban would be beneficial. And I feel like if anyone here does have any young people in mind that they're thinking about from this webinar today, that just reach out to them and just kind of be that unjudgmental ear for them, to have someone to talk to and have that open line of communication, which is really, really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah, Em and Lauren have covered it all pretty well. Just, yeah, really emphasizing that the solution is not going to be a ban for social media for all young people. It's going to be regulating the things that we're trying to stop from happening in a safe way that actually works, which we do see happen on some platforms, and so it is possible. But yeah, that the solution just isn't going to be banning it for all young people.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a change on a system level, which might not necessarily be the ban, because I feel like that puts it on the individual. I think if we start it from the top and work with the social media companies to make a change, it's going to make much more of an impact that way, rather than putting it back onto the individuals and all that kind of thing. So I think that we should focus all the government and also like funding towards that push and that fight, because on an individual level we can't make that fight as well with the social media companies.
Yeah, absolutely. Really interesting thoughts. We do have a few questions just to finish off before we run out of time. We were always taught as kids how to spot a rip in the surf. It can be quite hard to know that the content you're consuming has potential for harm. Do you have any suggestions for young people or parents to better understand or recognise when things have the potential for harm or are being harmful? And I suppose peers are very important between young people, and peer influence and peer support. And I suppose I'm wondering, in your personal experiences, whether you have observed people sort of being adversely affected, and whether as peers or parents what we should do, how would we pick this up, and then what action would you take personally?
I would love to start if that's okay, Zinni. Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely a lot of reflection for me. There's videos that I see and I can just tell in my body I feel stressed. I can tell that I'm like clenching up, or I can tell like different videos, it makes me have like negative thoughts. Like if it's body image stuff, then I start thinking about myself, and it's really hard to be aware of that stuff. And I think it's kind of having conversations and just trying to be really mindful and think like, okay, how is this making me feel? Is it making me feel happy or negative? And because certain videos like weight loss, even if it's like, like a positive thing, it's not trying to be very eating disorder. I find that sometimes really stresses me out. So then I just block, or I say not interested to every single video that comes up. And then I try to interact more with other ones. But I think it's really difficult to reflect. And I think even parents, like when you're watching on social media, see things that make you feel upset, and then talk to your kid about it, being like, hey, I saw videos that were about this and it made me feel unhappy. Have you seen videos like that? And how did you respond to that? I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, great idea.
Yeah, and building off of that as well, I think that the most important thing for young people is reflection on it, thinking back, okay, I've been watching this person a lot, I haven't been feeling that great about it, or I've been wondering their views on this, or like talking to friends about that. I mean, we see lots of misogynistic content being brought up or being consumed, and it changes young men, specifically young men's views on things. So I think in that situation, it's important as a parent of young people to really be informed, and without just saying, no, you can't go on social media, teaching your children that some things are wrong and not everything on the internet is right. It is not a good view to have, maybe. So yeah, just really overall for everything, staying informed about what your children are consuming, and maybe having a chat to them about certain topics that you might not particularly agree with.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I agree with Zinni. And I was just going to say, for parents, I feel like everyone thinks that it has to be like this really big thing where a child might come to you and break down and be very emotional, but it can just be like small, subtle changes that you might notice as a parent. So you might not think anything of is just normal teenage experience, but if maybe you like prod a little bit more or dive a little bit deeper, you might discover the root reason why they're going through what they're going through, and be able to open up and get that dialogue going and seeing what's going on.
Alana, do you have thoughts?
I completely agree with what everyone said. I think encouraging that open dialogue for your young person in your life to come and speak to you as a parent. I think we do it really well, peer to peer. We can easily talk to our friends, but I think, yeah, there definitely needs to be a lot more conversations between young people and parents, especially about online. I think like the external world is honestly not too indifferent to the online world as well. So just as you would experience something offline in your world and have a conversation or exposure to different things, I think the same should happen for online experiences as well.
And maybe Em's comment about commenting on how we ourselves feel. So it's a really grounding thing to actually recognize that something's upset you, because sometimes it's not that extreme, is it? And to that, I really love that idea, because it really brings us out of our head into our body. And that's the thing about online stuff. You end up having this virtual life that really is disconnected from any type of physical sort of sensation, really. Which, yeah, I found that really an interesting idea. I love that. I'm going to try it because I have older teenagers. So we do have a question, and I was wondering about asking you this. What do you think about Instagram's new teen accounts idea? Is it good or bad? Are they likely to have any impact? Have you heard of that new information? No, Instagram has put up the notion that they'll have a special teen account, and by virtue of people being a teen, they'll be sort of sequestered off, and it's about limiting access to information in that specialist sort of environment. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I don't know too much about it, but I think that it could be a really good thing, and one of those things that we were talking on before, where it's more important to regulate what you can see and what is happening on social media than to just ban it completely. Like, for example, I think for a slightly younger audience, Messenger, like through Facebook Messenger, they have Messenger Kids, which can be monitored by parents if you're concerned about who your children may be talking to in the digital space or what they might be speaking about. I think that those options and being able to regulate that for the younger audience could work really well, instead of just a complete ban, still giving them access to that social media and being able to get the benefits of connecting with friends and learning about important things and whatever it is that you might be interested in. I think that those can be really beneficial and a solution, instead of just saying, no, you can't use it at all.
Yeah, I mean, now you've explained that, I sort of can see the connection between your logic and thinking about getting the most out of this resource, and in a way that navigates you to sort of positive, affirming content, rather than that insidious undermining content. So, because I had thought, I don't know, but yeah, that's a really interesting take. We're almost out of time. We've only got 4 minutes left. I suppose I just wanted to wrap up by saying I found this session across the whole kit and caboodle quite mind-blowing, really. And how do you wrap up something with such diverse levels, perspectives, and contributors? So I wanted to thank everyone who has been kind enough to share your views. I know this will be an ongoing conversation. I love the fact that a good proportion, pretty much all our presenters, had engaged with children and young people, informing the ideas that they were putting forward. So there are opportunities. Clearly, we need to up our game. And I'm sort of thinking about all the other aspects of our work at the centre, and I'm sure everyone else is thinking, how do we do this in a much more centering sort of way? Because I can see the value. I can see the value from everyone's perspective. It goes without saying that there isn't any easy answer, and the solution is probably occurring at multiple levels. So we heard from our National Commissioner of Children and Young People about the need for legislative change. Why isn't children's rights actually enshrined in our legislation, which would then mean that it would be expressed through action? We heard from the National Office of Child Safety about why aren't platforms being held to account? When we look at the data, there's huge issues of harm, and the platforms have that information and they use it very easily and freely about showing me I need a new mattress because I mentioned it. But when they can actually make a difference, they're not using it. And then we talked about researchers who really delve into how young people are navigating this space. And of course, Wayne Holdsworth talking about what this is like for a parent when the true horror sort of happens. And then yourselves sharing so freely in your time and effort and having done all this work to put forward a perspective that will help us all take this journey together. So thank you all so much. We're really hoping we will do what we call as a blog or an event review on the open portal, which will categorise some of these key messages. So, and link to all of the resources, because I suppose that's the last thing that I have come across. There is so much going on in this space, and I'd love to have that corralled in one place and then share that really broadly. And I'm really hoping that you all will share, everyone who is in this audience and on our great panel of speakers, will share the shared content together, because with all of that, we have a lot of resources to draw upon to help. And I'm certainly going to use those with my children, because I've sort of stayed away a bit, thinking, I'm one of those people who are actually perpetuating that silence. So I'm going to actually address that today. Thank you once again. Everyone's been so generous and would love to hear your thoughts either via email or as we go forward, and I think we'll probably have further sessions on this topic.